All right, what's going on, guys? We're going to be looking at basically testosterone optimization, man. Let's get into it. And basically, I kind of use these tips to help get me from this to this. So yeah, anyway, no more yapping. Let's go ahead and get right into it. So basically, I want you guys to understand the basics of testosterone first. So it is a steroid hormone that is created via steroidogenesis, right? So this process relies on cholesterol. Cholesterol is the master precursor to literally all of these steroid hormones, without exception, all of them. So you can see right here, this is like an example. So you start cholesterol, right? These are all of your steroid hormones that get created from that one precursor. So testosterone is like right here, and you have other steroids as well, the steroid hormones, right? So the first thing is diet. This is very important, absolutely fundamental. You need to be getting a fair bit of dietary cholesterol if you want to get your testosterone up. Now, I may make a separate video on this, but a lot of cholesterol has actually been demonized by the mainstream a fair bit. Obviously, like a lot of times it's blamed for things like cardiovascular disease. Obviously, I'm not saying that it doesn't play a role, but what I'm suggesting is it's being misunderstood, or maybe it's just not being properly oxidized or utilized, or or it's just not being properly utilized, or there are other things that also contribute to it. The bottom line is you do need cholesterol for testosterone, though, and if you're getting from clean sources, I don't view it as an issue. So, yeah, eat more cholesterol basically from clean sources, though, right? And I would say if you can get these foods high quality, I always try to recommend high quality, but if you can get them like raw and unsalted. So, I understand using salt if you're like cooking out, like if you're cooking your food, but like especially if you're eating it raw, like a lot of time, you're preserving the electrolytes and the structured water and stuff. So you typically won't really crave salt much at all. Like I noticed that I just literally don't like the taste of salt at all. But yeah, just trust your body on that. So things like egg yolks are very good for very rich in cholesterol. Dairy, you get a fair bit of saturated fat and cholesterol from there. So things like butter, especially, it's like concentrated fat. There's like a lot of cholesterol in there, and just like a fair bit of meats like liver, just fatty meat in general. So yeah, just nail the diet. I'll probably make a video on like a more detailed video on the diet later on. But yeah, and you have your thyroid. So its proper function is critical for testosterone synthesis and for steroidogenesis. So it ensures that cholesterol gets converted into its things as needed. And a lot of times, when people have like, I guess, high cholesterol or whatever, like a lot of times what's happening is that the cholesterol is like, it's chilling, but like it's not actually being converted because the thyroid could be underactive in a lot of people, right? So it's not actually being converted into the steroid hormones that you actually need. So if it's being converted, then it's chill, right? But a lot of times it's not. So basically, and I want you to get to know this term about the Leydig cells, right? So Leydig cells are the cells in your testes that produce testosterone, right? And T3 is the active thyroid hormone. So T3 promotes gene expression in the Leydig cells that essentially helps shuttle cholesterol into mitochondria, and then that kind of kickstarts steroidogenesis, which is the process that we looked at above over here. So very fundamental. So essentially you want to boost your T3 naturally, right? So minimize stress, that's very important. Increase your metabolic rate through some high quality carbohydrates, so things like like raw fruit, unheated honey, raw milk, etc. Ideally, again, everything would be like raw if you can get things from a good source, right? So just really try to do the best you can in that. So what this does, right, when you boost your T3, right, your SHBG will typically go down. So that's your sex hormone binding globulin. That, as the name suggests, it essentially binds to sex hormones, right? This will increase your free testosterone, right? So you can have a lot of total testosterone, but like if a lot of it's being bound up by like SHBG, for example, then what's even the point, right? So you want like unbounded free testosterone to be like in a decent position. So also your light environment, this is absolutely fundamental. So sun exposure, and listen, even if you're in winter, like it's fine, right? You should just still go outside as much as you can, just bundle up or whatever, because you're still going to absorb the sun. Even if you can't like physically see it yourself, you're still getting the sunlight through the clouds actually, so still go outside, it will still help for sure. So there are a few ways to boost testosterone, but one way is via the vitamin D Leydig cell axis. So the way this works is quite interesting. So ultraviolet B rays make contact with your skin, and from there you produce 7-dehydrocholesterol, and that gets converted into cholecalciferol, which is vitamin D3, and then that gets converted into 25-OHD, and then calcitriol, which is active vitamin D. So that's kind of how you get active vitamin D from sun exposure. So this active vitamin D, which is calcitriol, that binds to binds to vitamin D receptors to enhance testosterone production in the Leydig cells. So that's kind of how that works. And there's another axis through which this works as well, which is the skin-brain gonadal axis. So what happens is, again, we have the same UVB rays. So the UVB light will signal the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. And the brain releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone. And what that does is it triggers LH and FSH, so luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. And then these hormones will go through the bloodstream, reach the gonads, and then that prompts testosterone production. So quite a lot to wrap your head around, but basically, like, I just wanted to kind of break down the biochemical mechanisms through which this actually works. But the point is, like the actual implementation is really simple. Just like go outside and get some sun. Right? I just wanted to kind of explain the biochemistry behind it. But here we go. Environmental toxins. There are a lot of these guys. These things are real. They do exist, and I was just trying to minimize your exposure as much as possible. So some things I'm talking about are like heavy metals, PFAs, or like forever chemicals, or whatever. Pesticides and endocrine disruptors like synthetic fibers like polyester, nylon, you name it. And it's absolutely rampant these days. And then xenoestrogens in like skin self-care products or whatever. These things are absolutely rampant, guys. Like in shampoos, a lot of shampoos will have them, like xenoestrogens, like shampoos, skincare products, and then tap waters. I mean, maybe not that much, maybe it doesn't have as much of like xenoestrogens, but it just has like a lot of like heavy metals and contaminants in general. So just try to do what you can, try to cut out all the nonsense as much as possible. And there are always, like, for the most part, there are always like natural ways to go about doing things, and I may make another video on this as well. But just always try to do like things as naturally as possible and try to minimize your exposure as much as possible to all of these things. So your body is a natural detoxification pathway, luckily, but you do need to optimize it as much as you can to get rid of these toxins, and we'll get to that in a second. So yeah, just to get rid of years of toxicity, honestly. It really is quite crazy, but yeah. So one way is through the lymphatic system. And I'll explain how this ties to testosterone in a second, but so the lymphatic system is basically a way, it's a way that your body, gets rid of excess fluid or lymph. So it's critical for removing toxins, absolutely fundamental. And the problem is, for a lot of people though, it's restricted by years of like hardened and tightened fascia, like so connective tissue in your body, and this really restricts your lymphatic movement. So it is absolutely critical to kickstart your lymphatic drainage back again, so you can get toxins like flowing out. So movement, and maybe you can implement things like a gua sha or other special protocols, which I may get into some other time. But yeah, and I realize that in nature humans wouldn't just be dragging like a gua sha against their face, like just going like this and dragging a tool across their face. Maybe they wouldn't always do that. The thing is, you have to realize that these guys were like living very optimally, and they had quite ideal movement, and their lymphatic systems were absolutely dialed in. The problem is, for a lot of us, like in modern society, right, we just, sometimes just need to connect back to nature a little more, it seems. So, this is just kind of like a modern solution to sort of modern problem. But I mean, once you like fully fix your lymphatic system, you may not need it anymore, so you can just kind of ditch it. But just kind of, it can help starting out for sure. So we have EMFs, or electromagnetic fields. These things are real, guys. I mean, a lot of times, even if you can't like directly observe them with your own eyes, we do understand that these things exist. So they induce ROS production, so reactive oxygen species. And then what that does is it triggers oxidative stress in the body, like in cells. So then what happens is that cortisol rises in response to that stress. So because what many people believe is that cortisol is like kind of causing stress, but I wouldn't look at it that way. In fact, in a lot of cases, like cortisol is actually rising in response to stress. So it's just trying to like mitigate the damage. So it's like a response to stress, basically. So that the problem, what happens is that cortisol is also a steroid hormone. And the more cholesterol has to get used to be converted to cortisol. Right, so there's just less for testosterone. So we can go back up here to steroidogenesis. You can see we have testosterone right here, right? Or sorry, no, what am I saying? This is cholesterol, this is testosterone, right? You want more cholesterol to go to testosterone, but a lot of it is going to be going to cortisol to respond to stress. So then there's just naturally, like from common sense, there's just less to go to testosterone, right? So really you just kind of want to mitigate that as much as possible, right? Reduce EMF exposure and all that, and get rid of these toxins. And the way that the lymphatic system from earlier like kind of connects to testosterone is if you just remove these toxins in general, a lot of them will, like if you have less toxicity, you'll generally produce less reactive oxygen species, and then you just have less issues with testosterone in general, right? So yeah, let's get to grounding. This is another pretty helpful tool that can be utilized, I'd say, as much as possible. If you can just go outside and do it, that's great. So if you're not familiar with the term, basically grounding is just kind of connecting your bare skin, like your skin from like your hands or like your feet, to the ground, right? And the idea is that the ground essentially has like a limitless supply of free electrons. So what happens is that these electrons participate in reduction, which is a gain of electrons. So this combats the oxidation from like things like oxidative stress or whatever, and which is a loss of electrons. So this helps replenish electrons that you're losing like throughout the day because of like all this oxidative stress or whatever. So it's really helpful in that aspect. And then finally, sleep. This is absolutely critical, honestly non-negotiable. Is critical for testosterone, absolutely critical, because a significant part of your total testosterone is produced during your rapid eye movement sleep, right? So what happens is, here's like the biochemistry, right? So during sleep, the hypothalamus indicates to the pituitary gland to release luteinizing hormone. And then what that does is this, right? So the luteinizing hormone flows through the blood, and then it signals to the Leydig cells, right, which are the cells in your testes, to produce testosterone. So sleeping at appropriate times is obviously quite critical, and it helps optimize your circadian rhythm. I'm gonna make a video on that as well. But basically, the circadian rhythm is kind of like your body's like internal clock, so to speak, and it kind of essentially testosterone is supposed to be kind of produced more at certain times. So if you're just keeping your circadian rhythm in check, it really helps a lot with testosterone production. And you guys, I'm sure you guys know how this feels. Like if you just don't get a full night's like rest, like you can tell, like you feel noticeably worse that day. So I mean, and there's also another mechanism. So sleep deprivation triggers increased reactive oxygen species production, right? And what that does is it triggers Leydig cell apoptosis, which is literally programmed cell death. So think about what's happening. Like when you're sleep deprived, you are literally killing off your Leydig cells. And then if you're killing off your Leydig cells, you just literally cannot produce as much testosterone, right? So that's kind of the mechanism. But yeah, those are all the points, guys, for testosterone. And honestly, I mean, I may make more videos on some of these topics. I mean, you guys can let me know if you want to see something like that. And also, I mean, I'm probably going to make a school community in the near future. The reason I haven't gone ahead and done that yet is because, I'm just waiting for people to actually, join, right? Like once I know that I have enough people to join, then I'll kind of get the school community up and running. With that being said though, I do already have modules ready to publish. Like I already have modules that are ready to publish. I just need to like actually get the community started. So, I mean, if I know I have enough people to join though, then I'll for sure do it. But yeah, that's all for today's video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed, and fix your health, guys. Fix your health. All right, peace.